Yo, what up, Josh Rubin from East West Healing and Performance. Today I want to talk about breastfeeding. Now, I don't breastfeed, I'm not female, I don't have children, but I just want to share some of the information that I've learned through my own studies, through taking classes, learning from other osteopaths, things like that. Because what I do find, or I've heard from clients, is sometimes women are getting blisters, they're getting sores on their nipples, their children are having a hard time breastfeeding. And a lot of the times in our society we focus on it's the mother's fault, she's not producing enough milk, there's got to be an issue, which of course it can be an issue. There's certain enzymes, you have oxytocin, you have prolactin, etc. But there's many things that can affect the amount of milk that's being produced hormonally in a female, especially, especially T3 and estrogen. But of course, we can look at the infant as well. Now, I'm not saying this is the only reason, and I'm not here to blame mothers or babies. So I don't want to get a million emails saying I don't understand because I don't have kids, I don't understand because I don't have nipples, or I'm not female, or, it's not that easy. I just want to share this information because I think it's pretty interesting if we think about the body, the birth process, and what's going on. So let's think about this. I have some information here to read first. Milk develops in the mother's breast after the birth of her baby, of course. But it's the female's body going up to that that's going to set the stage to allow that to happen. So there could be cell energy production problems, hormonal issues, inflammation, etc. that can actually downregulate this and make milk production even harder. But the supply is replenished and increased only by the vigorous sucking that empties the breast. This is important. The sucking of the infant, the rolling and the peristaltic movement of the tongue, that's if the baby can move the tongue. Now the tongue movement, or the intrinsic and extrinsic muscles like the styloglossus, hypoglossus, genioglossus, these muscles are innervated by the 12th cranial nerve, the hypoglossal nerve. And it actually goes through the hypoglossal canal, which is at the base of the occiput, the basi-occiput, right around the condyles. And if you look at this little hole, if you can kind of see that, there's two of them, one right there and one over here. That's the hypoglossal canal. Well, the hypoglossal nerve goes right through that. That's the 12th cranial nerve. It's the only nerve that goes through that. So remember this. If the baby cannot suck correctly with the tongue, the milk supply is not renewed and it is very likely that it will eventually fail. The infant needs to open the mouth widely enough, which is called gapping or gaping, to allow the tongue to protrude forward, past the gum ridge, and then it must take a big mouthful of breast milk to ensure that the milk sinuses are managed by movement of the baby's tongue and by pressure from the lower alveolar ridge, causing the release of milk, which is ejected through the nipple. The tongue protruding over the gum ridge protects the nipple from being squashed painfully. Peristaltic movement of the tongue, the rippling from front to back, strokes of the breast draws out to maintain the flow of the milk. And these movements of the tongue also stimulate the nipple to elongate, so that it is pointing down to the baby's throat and directing milk to the esophagus. Now we have to think about this. Hold on. There's many factors that produce milk and allow the baby to get milk. The position of the baby, the suckling, the position of the nipple, and the milk production by the mother. Now you have to think about this. There's many reasons for this, but we're just talking about one today. When a baby's born, there's many ways to have birth. C-section, vaginal, etc. The bottom line is, in your body, everything has kind of an ossification center. And bones ossify at specific ages as you grow. Now, the condyles of the occiput, which is C0, and that interdigitates with C1 of the cervical spine. The condyles are actually in two pieces when a baby's born, and they ossify to be one piece around 3 to 5 years of age, which is pretty interesting. So any trauma to any bone that interdigitates with the basi-occiput can actually have effect on these ossification centers and how they ossify, which could be C1, which could be its interdigitation with the basisphenoid, its interdigitations with the foramen magnum, with the petrous portion of the temporal bone. So all these bones per se, in fashion and things in there, can actually affect the development of the condyles. And of course we have to think about the fascia in the cranium because the falx cerebelli actually goes all the way around the foramen because it can actually affect the foramen magnum. And you have to think about the falx cerebri and tentorium cerebelli where they attach and originate on specific bones, ethmoid, petrous portions, sphenoid, etc., Sutherland's fulcrum and the occiput. They can have an effect based on their tension if a bone or if there's a trauma of some sort. So the bottom line is, anytime the body breathes, the bones breathe, they expand and contract. Every bone moves along specific axes. And it does this to actually milk these nerves, pump these nerves, kind of nourish these nerves per se, and many other structures, veins, arteries, etc., lymphatics. We can conclude two things: that if we have an issue with the condyles of the occiput, the base of the occiput, ossification center, or any type of trauma, or any type of lesion, anything, we will have an effect on how the occiput moves and the development of the hypoglossal canal, as well as any of the structures that go through the hypoglossal canal, creating impingement or lack of nourishment, or lack of pumping and possible impingement. Now remember, the hypoglossal nerve innervates the extrinsic and intrinsic muscles of the tongue. Tongue movements, they create the peristalsis. The peristalsis of the tongue stimulates an area below the nipple that actually causes enzymes to be released to increase breast milk production. So of course we have to look at the mother and say, can she produce the milk? But we have to look at the child too. So if someone is having issues with milk production, now there's many reasons, I'm just giving you one and something to think about. What if you had a C-section and the doctor pulled the baby really hard from the base of the cranium? What if you have a vaginal birth and it was a traumatic birth and the baby was suctioned out or pulled out? Or what if you had a regular birth and the baby was stuck in the birth canal? Whatever it may be, if there's trauma to the base of the occiput, we will see issues with the hypoglossal nerve, which innervates the muscles of the tongue, creates the peristalsis to stimulate the enzymes to increase milk production. Now, if the baby can't increase milk production with its suckling, a lot of the times there's not a good suction. A lot of times the female will get blisters and get sores. At the same time, the baby will take in a lot of air because it can't latch down properly, which can cause a lot of colic-like activity and getting a lot of gas and things like that because it's taking in not as much milk as it should, but more air than it should. At the same time, or I shouldn't say at the same time, so we have to think about this. We can think about that if we have any issue with that canal, hypoglossal canal both sides, the movement of how the occiput moves, the movement of the temporal, the movement of the sphenoid from a traumatic birth will affect how the hypoglossal nerve goes through the hypoglossal canal, will affect the bone. Now we have an effect on the extrinsic and intrinsic muscles of the tongue. We affect peristalsis, we affect stimulation of the enzymes that actually cause milk production. So we can conclude that there's two things, or there's many other reasons, but with this YouTube, there's two things that can cause lack of milk production. The first is issues with the hypoglossal canal, issues with movements of the tongue, causing issues with peristaltic movement, issues with gaping and latching on, issues with suckling, which causes decreased stimulation of these enzymes because it's not stimulating the area below the nipple. That we could say is kind of, we have to look at the child. At the same time, we can look at the mother, their metabolism, what's going on. Are they in an inflamed state? Are they hypothyroid? Are they estrogen dominant? Are they low progest? Things like this can actually facilitate this and cause lack of milk production. So, of course, it's two facets. Now, what to do? Of course, you have to look at yourself. You have to look at your nutrition, your metabolism. And I highly recommend working with someone one-on-one, like ourselves, doesn't have to be us, to help regulate your metabolism and cell energy production, to help upregulate milk production. At the same time, taking your child to a skilled craniosacral therapist that knows this aspect of what they're doing. They work with kids. They know how to work the foramens. They know how to work the basic occiput. Or a skilled osteopath that does manual therapy, which is true osteopathy, that has been taught osteopathy outside of the United States, in Canada, Europe, Switzerland, things like that, that can actually work in the cranium, the basic occiput, the foramens, etc., to actually help establish movement in the bone, to help milk the nerve, to free up the nerve, to allow normal peristaltic movement of the hypoglossal nerve, innervating the tongue muscles so the tongue can actually stimulate the zone under the nipple to increase breast milk production. So hopefully this YouTube wasn't a lot to take in. Hopefully it makes sense. Do a little bit more research. Find someone in your area that you can actually bring your child to. If you're in the San Diego area, you have us. There's Viola Fryman, which is one of the pioneers in osteopathy. Her clinic is actually in San Diego, and they work specifically with children. But there's many craniopsychotherapists, biodynamic craniopsychotherapists, and skilled osteopaths all over the U.S. Just do your research. So hopefully you've enjoyed this clip. I did. I'm out of here.